just waiting on questions or comments or discussions. Anything you want to talk about, Jeff?
No, I was just I haven't been on one of these, so I just thought I'd kind of pop in, see how things are and what it was like.
Yeah.
How do you feel about Aura and getting it complete?
Well, it was a record speed,
Was fast, no doubt about
which
it.
doesn't really it doesn't surprise me, right? So we haven't seen it yet, of course, but I'm suspecting that it's going to be a very short rule, right? So if it's anything like the DFAR 7021 original, then it shouldn't be a very lengthy document. So it shouldn't take very much time to read it.
Right, right.
I would hope. I mean, there's going to be a contract clause, so it can't be very long.
Right.
Can't be 100 and some pages.
So, and I figure what it hits the registry in what, maybe a week or two, hopefully.
Yeah,
I mean, 60 days.
Yeah, I mean, well, they typically it'll hit the Federal Register within like 2 weeks, I think.
Yeah,
because it's really been, once it gets through OIRA, it's just a matter of getting it in the right format and doing whatever they need to do. I wouldn't think it would take that long to get it in there, but they may have, if the DoD has to do anything to it, it'll take a week or so, and
yeah,
then the Federal Register will publish it.
And it has to be in there 60 days. Is it a minimum 60 days, or is that a hard number?
For the public comment period?
Yeah, for the public, it's 60 days, right?
I think so. I think it can be 30 to 60 days, or maybe even 30 to 90 days, but it'll probably be a 60-day comment period, I would guess. Typically what they do, but
and then
adjudication shouldn't take very long at all. It's not that long of a rule, right? I mean, it shouldn't be that long of a rule. Morning, Chad. But
morning.
So
remains to be seen.
Yeah. So I know people are saying, hey, it'll show up in the first quarter. I think that's pretty fast. I think second quarter makes more sense to me.
Yeah, I think the my personal guess is that it won't show up actually as a final rule until March, the 48 rule. The 32 CFR will show up. I'm betting on October as final, and that'll, once that happens, then assessments can start. It won't show up in contracts, right?
Right.
But assessments, in theory, can start as soon as that rule gets finalized. So companies can start hiring their C3PAOs and getting their assessments done.
Right.
So hopefully that's the case, because we got to get some companies going through this before it starts showing up in their contracts. Otherwise,
sure,
everybody's behind the curve. I think there's another myth out there too, right? That well, my contracts won't get hit with this for, I'm not going to have a new contract for 5 years. Well, if I'm a small business and I'm hoping to get on some large prime contracts,
right,
well, the primes are going to start requiring it sooner than the government is.
Absolutely.
So
we signed one last week, and their prime is all over. Well, one of their primes, they work with pretty much all of them, and they're in the aerospace business.
Gotcha.
And I mean, there's that was a record deal. We signed that deal within 3 days. Time we talked to them, pitched them everything, because they're just feeling the heat.
Was that to be ready for CMMC, or was that to get their 800-171 assessment done?
No, they've been pretty good about their 800-171. This was, and they work on, fighters and stuff. So they're
Gotcha.
They're dealing with the war fighters. So I think they're a little more at the front of the line, so to speak. Lockheed specifically is all over them.
Mm-hmm.
They want them, and I think they're not a sole source provider, but I think they're a very few number that do some of the parts that they do.
Okay.
So Lockheed was like, we're not farting around. You have to have this done.
Good. I think that's going to happen more and more.
Yeah,
You know,
agreed.
because primes, because primes start forming their contract teams, 2, 3 years, maybe even more in advance in some of these large contracts. And as they're forming their teams, they're going to be doing risk reduction on their teams. If somebody's not ready, they're not going to be
Sure.
not going to be a candidate.
Yeah, go put a $2 billion contract in jeopardy. See what happens.
Exactly. You're
Wanna-
going pretty.
wanna feel
You're
some
going
heat.
pretty quick.
Yeah, that'll be heat right there. So
Yeah. I know back when I was at Booz Allen, I remember one capture program was going on because of delays in the contract and things. I swear it went on for 10 years of the 20 years I was at Booz Allen. So
wow.
it seemed like it was going on for, I think people made careers out of being the capture leads for
Sure.
that.
Absolutely.
And those teams are huge, right? I mean, you're talking hundreds of teammates, and
Yeah.
So the demand for and nobody's going to say, oh yeah, you can just be CMC level 1, because I don't think I'm going to send you CUI. They're not going to know that,
Right.
right?
That's exactly right. And even if they think they're not going to, they probably are.
Exactly.
Right. And
Exactly.
probably 80% of the people I talk to don't have a good handle on that. Don't know what they do and don't have, and they don't know where they get it from. And
Yeah.
it's just that's more the rule than the other.
Yeah. So the thing that scares me the most, and this is why MSP CyberX exists, is that MSPs are not, and MSSPs are not either not aware or just ignoring it. I'm doing an assessment right now, a gap assessment for a pretty significantly sized business, and they use an MSSP for their SOC. That SOC is not even in the ballgame.
Right.
And so they know that for and they're getting ready next month. They're going to have a DIBCAC assessment, DIBCAC high assessment. So I'm doing a gap assessment because they've never been looked at before. So
Wow.
luckily they're in good shape. But there's MSSP. If it was a CMMC assessment, they'd be out of luck.
Sure. No, absolutely.
So
We've probably had, I don't know what's going on in the last 2 months. I think we've got 5 DIPCAC highs going right now. Just people showing up saying, "Oh my God, I got a letter." They're going to be here. They're going to be here in 10 days. They're going to be here whatever. And I'm like, you got to call me sooner. I mean, you're. Let's see if we can make a little bit of lemonade here out of these lemons, because it's bad.
Yeah, I've heard some rumbling. I think the DIBCAC is trying to do some stress testing of their capabilities, and so maybe they're doing the same thing with the DIBCAC high. They're doing it with the joint surveillance assessments. I know I've been reached out to for a couple of assessments in October, and for joint surveillance assessments. So I think there's a week in there that they're trying to see if they can see what is the maximum the current infrastructure can handle.
Sure.
For doing assessments, and they're trying to get as many assessments done in that 1 week as possible. So,
Ronnie, do you know how I've never actually looked to see how they're staffed, how many members are in there, that kind of thing. Do you have any visibility into that?
I've heard rumblings. I mean, so I've heard, that they've been on a hiring binge, right?
Sure.
And I think they were staffed at like 100 and some staff members.
Staff, okay.
But I don't really know how many. And of course, the experience levels, because they're hiring, is a government position.
Right.
I have no idea what the experience levels of the people are in there. I've experienced a few. I mean, there's some really, really good, really well seasoned assessors in the DIBCAC, and I'm sure there are others that are very junior in there. But
I'm trying to figure out what's their capacity, what's their ability to process these. Even if you had C3PAs out there performing, you still, it's kind of like us on FedRAMP. Right now, FedRAMP's running, the PMO's running about 6 weeks, right? And then the agency, if it's going through an agency, it's taking 4 to 8 weeks. So if you put those two together, you're from the time we're finished, it's still another 2.5 months.
Yeah.
And that won't surprise me if DIBCAC doesn't have some kind of, what's their backlog and do they have that capacity starting to build up?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what their DIBCAC high assessment backlog is. I know they've been scheduling joint surveillances all the way out to the end of the year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, but there's a lot more in the queue that want to get assessed, but haven't got their name drawn out of the hat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think that's, it'll be interesting to see too where their focus goes once the rule hits, and will they swing their focus to level 3s, or what will they be focused on? They won't be doing certification assessments. They're not. That's not part of the rule. DIBCAC is not a certification. No.
Yeah, that's something that I haven't seen a whole lot on. Is you still have an existing 7012 requirement, 7019, 7020, and now you've got a new requirement, and they're responsible to monitor both.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not I can switch from this one to this one. This is I've got to add capacity on top.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole motivation for setting up an independent accreditation body, right, was to alleviate that demand for the 200,000 non-government contractors, to alleviate the burden of that on the government agencies, because they knew they didn't have the capacity to handle it, to outsource that and public what do you call that? Make that public, a public issue, a public thing.
Sure.
To have the contractor community basically not self-policing, but having the industry driving the ship on that. And that way, in theory, I suppose the DIBCAC could position themselves to do random audits of accredited, certified companies, but I haven't seen that in the rule. It wasn't in the proposed rule that they would do that. It was the proposed rule. The only DIBCAC requirement is to do level 3 assessments after, of course, that's after a company has already gone through a level 2 assessment.
Right.
So in the meantime, I suppose DIBCAC would still be focused on DIBCAC high assessments, verifying people's claims on their 800 171 scores, there's SPRS scores rather. That would still be something they're going to have to do for the next 4 or 5 years, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. Now it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Mm-hmm. Sure will. All right, so we got a pretty good number of people on here. Just wanted to kind of just give a real quick overview for some of the folks that haven't been on any of these before. We these are kind of free form discussions. Really, it's really office hours, just like if you were taking a college class and your professor offered you office hours. I don't profess to be a professor, but I know a few things about CMMC. So it's really to answer your questions, the things that are coming up, to have you bring up questions, have the rest of the community that's on the call talk about those questions, and come up with those answers and try to get you some help. John, you have your hand up.
Yes. Hi, Brian. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Yes.
Awesome. I have a question. So I'm currently working with one of my clients, and obviously they have a physical office and they allow users to also work from home. And the question is around printing. So there are, the question is, if, since the client allows printing CUI physically in the office,
Yeah.
So the first question is, and they don't allow it, via Wi-Fi. They only allow it through physical LAN, via the wire over the local area network. So two questions here. Number one, based on their scoping diagram and their scoping, they are considering the network out of scope, because before CUI gets on the network, it's encrypted with FIPS validated encryption. But now they want to print over the wire. And I remember I had one of the, I think it was maybe Jeff, I've forgotten his name. He had said that if you print over the wire, then you don't need to worry about encryption. So I kind of wanted to validate, is that correct? That if you're printing in the office over a physical wire, does that meet protecting CUI, or do you still need to encrypt it?
So the entire when their network in their office, that
Yes.
includes the printer, that network would be considered in that situation a CUI asset, and that printer would be a CUI asset. And so if their physical environment is protected, that would be considered an alternative safeguard. So the communication across the local area network, to from the PC to the print server to the printer, would not need to be encrypted itself, because it never exits that protected environment. So it's protected by alternative means. Now, if it goes over Wi-Fi, or if it goes, out into the internet to some for some reason, and then comes back, well, that obviously that transaction, that communication would have to be encrypted with FIPS validated cryptography. So it really, depends on that. But the printer and the local area network would definitely be in scope as a CUI asset.
Yeah, so then it's almost like a catch-22 situation, because they want to have their network to be out of scope, because they're mostly using GCC high for CUI storage and processing. Obviously, the laptop, but so is there a way to still keep the network out of scope while allowing printing?
Print, you could have the printer completely disconnected from the network and have your printer directly connected to your laptop. That would be about the only way that I can think of. Anybody else have opinion on that?
I mean, if you've got, let's say they're using Azure Virtual Desktop and GCC High, the minute they pull that CUI data down to their PC,
Yeah.
and the minute even if it's USB connected to that printer, the minute it hits that network's in scope.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's not, I've had lots of people say, wait a minute, because printing, the minute you print, you bring the facility into scope.
Correct.
And so I haven't found a way around it, other than if you wanted to bring it down and you wanted to put it on a flash drive and sneaker net it over to it, but you still bring the PC into the network. Then you don't really buy anything. So, John, to the best of my ability, we have not been able to keep that out of scope, and we've tried.
Yeah.
Jeff, what would you think about classifying that local PC as a contractor risk managed asset, where it's not intended to store, process, or transmit, but may, i.e. the only processing that would take place would be through the printing? I agree with you 100% that as soon as the CUI document, if you will, traverses the network, that network becomes a CUI asset because it's transmitting the CUI, and thus, CMMC allows us two mechanisms for separating assets, right? We have physical or logical. So there's not a whole lot you can do to physically separate your network if you need to print across it to a printer, but perhaps you could get creative with some sort of encryption mechanism that would allow you some separation there. But
what you can also do is at the printer level, if it supports it, you can use access control to limit what machines are able to print to it. But if it's printing CUI, it's still going to be in scope based on who is printing to it. So if the workstation is a CUI asset or a SPA or a CR, whatever it is, it's going to inherently store CUI temporarily or not, even though it's not intended to be. From what I've seen and heard from our experiences with DibCAC, they prefer to see it as a CUI asset, even though it's not really intended to. You got to treat it the same way. So they'd rather see it have a higher level, and then ultimately you're going to print it, which means the printer is in scope. But if you can show administrative control, then they might not consider the printer completely in scope. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've never, I don't know, the printer would be definitely be in scope. I guess it's a matter of what kind of asset you're really considering it, but typically, the minute CUI is flowing to it, it's going to be a CUI asset.
Right.
And then what I've experienced, at least in the joint surveillance assessments, I had one large client that basically had virtualized all of their CUI, they were GCCI and everything else. And then they made the grand mistake of having one printer in an office down in DC that people could use if they wanted to from that environment. So that brought their entire facility, that particular facility, into scope for all the PE controls, all of those on-site, required on-site controls. So there's a an SC, some of the SC controls, some of the the PE controls and others, and that printer was in scope, and all the print, everything that was touching that printer was in scope. So the local area network, the print drivers, the print servers rather, and that sort of thing. All of that was now in scope for that assessment, even though they were completely GCC high and they only randomly printed every, on a rare occasion that they print. That's still, all of that stuff came into scope. Scott?
Hey, Brian, I ran into a similar issue, and it started the DibCAC assessors then pivoted to how are we technically controlling printing outside of just policy controls. Then the next question was, how do you control printing at alternative work sites? So
Right.
In this case, I believe John mentioned he has folks working in an office as well as from home being the alternative work site. And so in theory, if they're able to print across that wired LAN, they're probably able to print to their home network as well. So John, just a fun consideration there is you'll need to put together controls and demonstrate capabilities for remote printing as well.
Right.
So Scott, thanks for that. So are you saying that you're going to use policy to ask users not to print and that will suffice, or are you saying something different?
No, I'm saying you need to have both technical and policy controls around it. So likely something on like an AUP or something like that says, thou shall not print unless it's an authorized device type of a thing, and it's been made aware, because you'll need to be able to categorize that printer and note where it's going. But then some sort of technical control if you don't want them to print there, right? Because if folks have the capability to print, then in theory they can print CUI. And so then the next question that you'll be asked is, how are you controlling CUI at these alternative work sites?
Yes, and that's that's more like the catch-22 there, or the challenge, because for example, for us, as an MSP, we've totally blocked printing. So I can't print from my work laptop. But obviously for some customers, they struggle with that. They say they need to print. So, and to your point, once you allow printing in the office, obviously, yes, hardly, I've not figured out the solution yet on how you can block that from printing at home. So it's almost like, if you are in, you're in type of deal. So yeah, that's a challenge where customers are wanting to print CUI and at the same time wanting to keep the network out of scope. But just, FYI for everyone, one thing I'm looking at now is that universal print, being able to print via GCC High. I'm actually testing that process. It's not really worked, but I'm testing it out to see if that's a feasible solution. Yeah, but other than that, because then with the universal print, that may take care of the requirements both in the office and from home, because then you can control what printers can print to, and you can control what users can print to what printers just from the cloud without any on-prem file servers. And I checked, and Microsoft was saying that it's the same, the same data centers and storage that hosts Exchange, email and SharePoint is the same they're using for Universal Print. So far, that seems to be the only promising solution right now for that, but more to come because it's still in testing phase. But yeah, that's part of the challenge, Scott, is, and I think like Jeff said, it looks like so far there's no solution. So it's either if you want to print, you will have to bring your networking scope.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, it's definitely a can of worms. It reminds me of that children's book. If you give a mouse a cookie, he'll ask for a glass of milk.
Yeah.
You want to print one document, eh?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Of course, then if you're allowing somebody to print to an office environment from a remote environment, well, how is that CUI protected while it's sitting on the printer? Or is it like Kevin suggested, is there access control on the printer so that you can log into that? When then again, the printer is subject to all those controls. So because it now houses CUI in theory. Well, it doesn't really have CUI if it's using print servers, but the servers are still in scope. So all right. That is a horse we're going to probably beat to death for a few more times as we kind of move down the road.
100%.
Yeah. What other challenges are people facing? How are you finding your clients and the people you're working with? How are they dealing with documentation? Are they getting their documentation together? Are they interested in that? Are they?
I find it's hit or miss. You have some folks that are really quite capable and are writing high quality documentation, and then you have others that I'm not sure that they would pass a collegiate 100 level writing class, where the documentation is just atrocious.
Yeah.
It's definitely a challenge. I'm finding that amongst my team, customers are far more aware of the value of their documentation now than they were, say, 9-12 months ago. I think,
Yeah.
and I'd be curious if others saw this as well, but for a while it felt like folks were kind of like, okay, I need this technology stuff, and that's kind of shifted to, I need these documents too. People are still aware that GCC High are in the fold and necessary, although most of them can't articulate why. It's like they saw it on a blog post and therefore they need it. But they're also now pulling more into like, we need this whole compliance documentation. It's not just buying a sovereign cloud, if you will, and moving forward.
Oh, good. Yeah. I'm finding that to be true as well. Amiri?
Hey, gents. Good morning.
Good morning.
Appreciate you putting this session on. It's very helpful. Speaking of documentation, so I'm actually authoring all the documentation for my company right now. And so I'm pulling bits and pieces from here and there and then customizing it to what we do in our environment. So I was just kind of curious, is there any intent or anything down the pipe coming? I know like State Ramp and FedRAMP have templates for the different policies and procedures. Any idea if we may see something like that for CMMC?
I haven't heard any rumblings about that. The only templates I really expect to see are the templates that have to do with producing the assessment results and reporting the assessment results up to the DoD. I don't think that they'll standardize on any kind of like, policy sets or things like that. They won't. I don't. They won't go as far as the FedRAMP has gone with their documentation, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
I concur.
Yeah, it's a lot, and what the they're in FedRAMP. I mean, it's a much, well, it's not a static environment, but it's a much more, they know exactly what they want to do. They know the package they want to have. It's much more akin to the the federal documentation that they have to do through for FSMA and everything else. They don't want to get dictatorial about what solutions or what documentation any particular company has to do, because that'll be very heavily driven by the business and by the industry.
Yeah, specifically user defined, company defined stuff.
Mhm.
FedRAMP, you don't get a lot of wiggle room there. You're going to meet what they are required, as opposed to a lot more flexibility in the CMMC world,
Right.
comparatively.
Which makes it very interesting as an assessor, because we see all kinds of different form factors and combinations of things in these environments and in documentation suites that are all over the map. So it makes it interesting, makes it challenging, keeps it more fun, I think, personally. Of course, Jeff may be having a lot of fun with FedRAMP assessments, but
Fun is not the word I would use for that.
Yeah.
Are you all, speaking of FedRAMP, are you all hearing any whispers about FedRAMP for cloud-based SPAs? So take like a cloud SIM, and a potential for FedRAMP moderate requirements.
Whispers or screams?
The screams.
People are screaming on both sides of that issue. I was curious if you all have heard anything about which way DoD's leaning. And their public comment adjudication, they mentioned that FedRAMP was required, but that's not in any official documentation.
Right. Yeah. So the proposed rule was somewhat conflicted, right? So they had some rumblings towards it in the rule itself, but they really didn't address it. But up in the comment section of their answers, questions, their question adjudication or whatever they up in the front matter, they made it pretty clear. If it stores, processes, or transmits CUI or security protection data, it had to be FedRAMP moderate. But they didn't translate that back into the 170 clauses. So the question will be, will they fix that?
Right.
There were a lot of comments about that. I know I made one about whether they're going to, which way are they going to go? They need to make it very clear. 800 171, there's discussion in there about protection of assets that have CUI or security or data or security protection of assets that process, store, or transmit CUI. So there's some things in the NIST standards that say, hey, you should be thinking about this data. They did a poor job in the proposed rule of defining what they meant by security protection data. Hopefully they'll fix that. But what I'm hearing and the rumblings I'm hearing, and others can weigh in, is that the DoD is very much concerned about security protection assets because of some of the recent events. Right? I mean, there's numerous events that would say, yeah, we should be concerned about those systems that are protecting our system, our environment, because they are vulnerable themselves. So I don't see them getting less concerned about it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And just to play devil's advocate for a moment, part of me wonders if they'll take that step forward and require FedRAMP on SPAs, because that would be a new technical requirement. And one of their key notes that they've been saying about CMMC is that there's no new technology implementation costs. The only thing that really needs to be done is your assessment and a SPERS recording annually, right? And maybe some preparatory work for the assessment. But there's no new technology because you've already implemented 171 Rev 2, right? However, 171 Rev 2 does not require FedRAMP for cloud-based security protection assets. So if they took that as a step forward and said SPAs have to be FedRAMP moderate or equivalent, then that would be a new technical implementation cost for any company that's not using a FedRAMP version of, CrowdStrike, for example.
Well, I mean, just 171, the NIST standard does not say anything about FedRAMP, right? For CUI or otherwise. DFAR 7012 does. Okay. So, it just says you must protect CUI in accordance with all the 171 rules. It doesn't say that you have to have FedRAMP assets. So it doesn't talk about that. But the DFAR 7012 requires it for CUI, and the question is, will the DoD now? Should they and should they do something more incremental? Sure. Will they? Probably not. They're not going to say, well, okay, we'll phase in your protection of security protection assets. That's a risk that they're concerned about. I think they're going to close the door on it pretty tightly. Personally, that's my personal opinion. Yeah. Time will tell. Hopefully in October we'll know more.
I agree with you. I don't think that's one of the things that we're dealing with right now, because we're a FedRAMP assessor, is that one of the challenges for companies who wanted to go through the FedRAMP process is if they didn't have a sponsor, they couldn't go through.
Right.
Right. Well, what that does is it puts a pretty strong barrier for pick somebody in the MSP space.
Yeah.
Pick ConnectWise. Just picks anybody. Ninja, doesn't matter. And they wanted to be in these CMMC environments, CUI environments, then they would need to be FedRAMP. So the DoD says, hey, we'll have an equivalency program that replaces the agency with DIBCAC. Okay, well, that's one way, but if you're going to go through the expense of FedRAMP, it's extremely expensive to go through that. Minimum $250,000 to do that. Okay, well, now FedRAMP saying we're gonna allow you to go through FedRAMP without an agency. Okay, without a sponsor. Okay, that changes everything.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of things going on the FedRAMP side that also could impact this.
Right. Yeah, that new rule, that new memo that changes that just came out, what, July 20th something?
Yeah, a month ago. Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. So they're changing the program. So that'll be interesting to see how that works and how they're resourced to be able to handle that.
Because I do have 2 or 3 software companies in our world calling saying, okay, tell me about this equivalency thing. And now more recently, okay, I don't have to have a sponsor anymore. What does that mean? So
yeah.
A lot of education going on in there.
Yeah. I mean, I know some of the bigger players in the MSP space are addressing it seriously. Threat Locker has made statements. Kaseya has made statements. I think Ninja, I'm not sure where they stand, but some of the bigger players are definitely talking about it. I don't know. I haven't heard what ConnectWise's plans are, but I make it a point every time I go to a conference that has a lot of every booth I go to, I ask them what their plans are for FedRAMP. Most of them say, "What? Why would we do that?" Or others say, "Yeah, we don't need to because we don't actually store CUI. Like that's not what we're talking about." So, yeah.
They don't even understand the concept of security protection asset.
Right.
Brian, I apologize. I got to go. This is great. Thank you. I'll see you next
Yeah,
time.
Jeff, thanks for joining this morning.
Bet.
All right. All right, what other topics are hot on your minds? The on Slack, there is a place to pop questions for the office hours. It's channel CMMC office hours questions. So feel free to pop questions in there. Definitely join into the dialogues happening in some of the channels, and give us feedback. Let us know how things are working for you on there. If there's something that you'd like to have discussed, but you're not sure how to bring it up, send me a personal DM. I'm happy to work with you on that, or to post something if there's a question that comes up that you'd rather not post yourself. So feel free to do that as well. So take advantage of that Slack environment. That's what it's there for. There's other resources other than just me that are watching it and providing responses as well. So take advantage of that. I would say too, we have started a sponsorship program. So we're going to be asking vendors and others to provide sponsorships for CMMC, or for MSP CyberX rather, to help bring more good programs to the MSP community. So that's started. We've rolled that program out. Already have one large vendor that is offering a MSP CyberX a free booth at their major conference, and so they're going to be basically the cost of that, it makes them a premier sponsor. So they'll be listed on there. We're going to have a special channel for vendors. Vendors won't have access to the entire Slack environment. They'll only have access to this one channel. That will allow them to come in, provide information for you all, let you ask questions of them, and that sort of thing. So it should be good, I think. And then we'll be asking for those folks to also provide intellectual white papers and things like that, a good content for us to digest as well. So it's a good opportunity. So as you go to different shows and talk to people, mention that to your favorite vendors, that they should come and talk to the MSP CyberX community. We'll be inviting special guest speakers into, say, the monthly meetings, quarterly meetings, that sort of thing. So as well. All right. Hey, Bobby, how are you?
Good, sir. Sorry.
That's okay. We're just getting ready to wrap up, but if you have a burning question, I will be happy to talk about it.
No, I just hadn't attended one and thought I'd try to. My granddaughter was kind of like she's leaving, and so I had to wait till she had.
Oh, no worries.
Left. So it's broken heart, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a bummer. Yeah, so you'll be able to the videos. What we always post, the videos will be posted sometime this week. We edit out all my faux pas, and then we post it up on the minutes, the CMMC office hour minutes channel on Slack, so everybody can go and watch that again. So
gotcha.
All right.
Hey, Byron, I gotta
All right.
jump
Well,
off. I'll be on the next one.
Yep, we'll see. So again, we'll be doing this again on Thursday afternoon at 5 p.m. I'll send out another invite. I'm going to try to find a different a mechanism for getting invites out to make sure people know about it. So that's why I sent it out to everybody this time. So, all right, folks. I'm going to run off now and get on an assessment call. So I have assessment calls the rest of the week. So we'll be doing a assessment for a large company. But all right, we'll talk to you all next time. Take care.
Yeah, and Brian, just one quick question.
Yeah.
Based on what you just said. Typically, how long does assessments take?
Oh gosh. So the actual what I call interview week is usually just a week, right?
Okay.
Depending on the complexity of the environment, things, I like if it's a pretty complex environment with pretty extensive documentation, like to have that documentation and be able to review it the week prior to that.
Okay.
But then we can get through all the interviews in a week, usually
Okay.
usually like 3 to 4 days. And then you have the fifth day as a sort of if you need to come back to something.
Okay, so between 10 users to 200 users, it's typically a week.
Yeah,
Okay.
typically is.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, sure thing, John. All right.
Okay,
Take
bye.
care. Bye-bye.